All righty, let's get rolling. He's Caleb Calhoun. I'm Dave Hooker. We are going to take a look at Josh Heupel's press conference over just moments ago. And Caleb, I always like to start out and get your thoughts, and then I'll kind of go from there and share with you what I think. After the press conference, what do you think?
I think the biggest thing that we all gathered was I think he was genuinely relaxed about the week. You know, you talked about this a couple of weeks ago about how tight Fulmer got before Florida week, and that just didn't show with Josh Heupel. He noted the you wouldn't think that because of the mistakes Tennessee made in last year's game, but Josh Heupel really talked about that as a turning point a couple of times. And I do remember watching that game and thinking, they were a drop fourth down from Jimmy Callaway. I think another penalty here or there. There were like 2 or 3 plays that could have made that game close. And the very next week, they came out and blew out the Missouri Tigers 63-28 or something like that. So it's really easy to see how that game could have been a turning point, because if you were in that game and you were Tennessee and you weren't sure about the system, you would say, oh, this actually could have worked had we just not made these few mistakes. And for their sake, thank God that happened then, because had that happened against Florida later in the year, they would not have had that same belief, because Florida turned out to be very below average.
Yeah, and it could have turned south too. I mean, maybe like, hey, this isn't working, even though it's our mistakes. It depends on the culture of the entire program, but also depends on the players' mindset. So I credit the players for being tough through that. A couple of players that were asked about in the receiver core, Squirrel and Ramel Keaton. I think Tennessee's deep. I think we know who the top three are and Jalen Brew and Cedric Tillman, but I think they can go deeper than that. Certainly, Squirrel gives them a whole different sort of look altogether.
I agree. Again, funny enough, before all the talk of Brew McCoy this offseason, I actually had Ramel Keaton slated in to still slot opposite Cedric Tillman no matter what. And last year, I had Ramel Keaton as the top guy to be the number one receiver until Cedric Tillman came out of nowhere. So I've missed the boat on Keaton twice, but I do think he's actually a pretty good receiver. I think it's just Tennessee, like you said, is loaded on the outside. And you're right, Squirrel White is a very unique slot receiver. He brings a little bit more speed than even Jimmy Holiday brings. They kind of remind me somewhat of each other, even though Squirrel White's a few inches smaller. Um, Obviously, the main slot receiver is going to be Jalen Hyatt. But you're right. There's probably an opening after that, because I think, as we talked about on Saturday, Jimmy Callaway was the other slot receiver, and I don't think he's playing this week. I don't know when he's coming back onto the field.
Yeah, with the punches thrown, his Mike Tyson impression. Hit that like and subscribe button, if you will, so that we can be a part of your day. Every day, each and every weekday, we have an 8:30 show that airs with Amanda LaFrada, but we also have Chris Landry and Jacob Warren, Tennessee tight end, and Cooper Mays on our YouTube channel. So Gerald Mincey, Tennessee's offensive lineman, will play Florida. There's been a coaching change. I don't know that there's any great advantage. I'd say he knows the defensive lineman well, and the defensive linemen know him well, and that's kind of what it's going to be.
Yeah, I agree. I know Heupel said they joked about it this week, but I'm with you. I don't think that it's going to have any impact whatsoever. I mean, particularly nowadays in college football, there's transfers all over the place, so there could be a little bit here or there. I mean, last week when Tennessee played Akron, yes, it's Akron, but there was a lot of familiarity between Joe Moorhead, and a lot of the Vols players played Mississippi State in 2019 when Joe Moorhead was head coach there. I don't think that had any impact on how they played on Saturday, and I don't think it's. I think it, you know, it could help, but you're right. I'm sure Florida has a completely new defensive scheme. I just don't see how this would really change anything.
The one thing that Josh Heupel mentioned, and I think it's the most likely way that Tennessee loses. I think Tennessee wins this game. I'll just go ahead and go on the record. They're a 10.5 point favorite. But the only way that I see Tennessee losing this game, or the most likely, would be if they don't have good rush integrity when they're going after the passer and Anthony Richardson. And if he's able to break some things, that can flip the field and change up some things. So it may be boring. You like seeing guys blaze off the edge, but And you better protect the inside gaps, the A and B gaps, or you're going to have an issue.
I agree. And this is where I talk about Tennessee's linebackers in coverage. I talk about that every week. Part of being a linebacker in coverage is also properly spying the quarterback if he's a mobile quarterback. And that was Tennessee's glaring weakness last year. Matt Corral ran for 195 yards on them last year, and then Bryce Young ran for 45 the next week before we even knew Bryce Young was a runner, which turns out he is. And so,
Yes.
um, but so I think that against an Anthony Richardson, they're really going to have to be prepared. To be fair, the difference with Anthony Richardson and then Matt Corral or Bryce Young is one, I don't know if Billy Napier properly uses Anthony Richardson the way he should, but also Anthony Richardson's not that deadly from the pocket. And I think Tennessee had more issues with quarterbacks who truly could beat you from the pocket, but if necessary, were mobile last year. And I think that that's where Tennessee's linebackers had issues. Again, Tennessee, Anthony Richardson's not a. It's probably a little bit easier to scheme because you can really beg Anthony Richardson to beat you from the pocket in this one.
A wrap up of Josh Heupel's press conference off the Hook Sports. He's Caleb Calhoun. I'm Dave Hooker, and we want you to like and subscribe so that we can be a part of your Tennessee football coverage and more basketball and all kinds of good baseball stuff coming down the line. But the one thing that I thought was interesting is Josh Heupel was asked, how does Hendon Hooker compare to Heupel when Heupel was a quarterback? And we look at Josh Heupel now and we think, wow, they're way different dudes. But he was an athletic guy, not as athletic as Hendon Hooker. But it stood out to me that he said that he thinks that Hendon Hooker is really good at the snap and clear. I don't want to read too much into that, but putting a bad play behind you is a big part of playing quarterback. And when I look at the other guy who played last year, I'm not trying to make this a way to knock Joe Milton, but I don't know that he's very adept at that. Hooker is. That's what you have to have as a quarterback. That last play might as well be 5 years ago.
Oh, I agree. I agree. That's been a great thing with Hooker. Going back to his first game, I mean, let's not forget this. Hooker became the starter against Pittsburgh because Joe Milton went down last year. And Hooker played well throughout the second half, but he was the reason they lost that game in the end because he made a really bad read on a 4th and 1. I can't remember if it was a handoff or a run play. It looked like a read option, and I can't remember if he kept it or handed it off, but he should have done the opposite
Right.
of that. And then he threw the interception at the end. And a quarterback coming in, this is my opportunity to steal the starting job and playing like that at the end, that could be so demoralizing to so many quarterbacks. And it really didn't phase Hooker at all. And so I think that you're right. I think he does do a great job of forgetting about the previous play. I think one difference that I'm noticing with Hooker and Josh Heupel is, Josh Heupel had the year Oklahoma won the national championship. Josh Heupel actually had a massive reduction in his stats. He was much better the year before when Mike Leach, I think, was Oklahoma's offensive coordinator for a year. And I'm not seeing any reduction in Hooker stats at all this year so far.
No, I don't think so. All in all, it is Tennessee Florida week. It is the opening press conference. For those wondering, no updates on injuries. You're just not going to get that. So Dylan Sampson a little bit banged up, Jabari Small banged up, Cedric Tillman banged up. I would expect from what I've heard that those guys all play. Are they 100%? I would think that the most likely to be 100% just based off what I've been told would be Jabari followed by Dylan Sampson, and you just kind of have to wait and see with Cedric Tillman. Those ankles and knees can get kind of touch and go. So we'll know more as the week goes on. He's Caleb Calhoun. I'm Dave Hooker. This has been a presentation of Off the Hook Sports. For more coverage, go to